Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for attending this month's webinar. It's presented by Carrie Appleton and the title is Purposeful Practice for Care of Self and Others. My name is Lydia Lofton. I'm currently the president of the International Pediatric Simulation Society, and I'm a pediatric intensive care nurse by background. For those of you who are not IPSS members, please consider joining the society as we offer many benefits to our members, including exclusive access to this recorded webinar and presentation after today's live session. So please visit our website and see the benefits of membership, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions about that. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes before we move on to the presentation. So first of all, please feel free to post questions and your thoughts during the session in the comments. We'd also like to ask that everyone that has joined us goes ahead and uses the chat function to introduce yourself. If you can tell us your name, where you're joining us from, and what your professional background is too, that will really help with the conversation as we move through Carrie's presentation. Carrie really wants this to be an interactive session, and she'll guide you on how we do that moving throughout. As I mentioned, Carrie will present Purposeful Practice for Care of Self and Peers. Carrie Appleton is an advocate for healthcare providers who are dealing with the inherent stress of their chosen work. It's a stress and an environment that she knows well. As a registered nurse, Carrie spent more than 20 years in pediatric intensive care units, providing bedside care, practice support, education, and extracorporeal therapies such as ECMO and CRRT. Since 2016, Carrie has combined her expertise in critical care with her education in nursing leadership to design effective, creative curriculum for adult learners in the hospital setting. Carrie's own experience prompted her to obtain additional training in critical incident stress support. She's a member of the Twin Cities Metro Critical Incident Stress Management Team, which is a group of volunteers who provide free critical incident stress debriefing sessions to first responder teams and provide real-time support services to staff experiencing critical incident stress in the hospital setting. I'm really excited about this presentation and really thankful to Carrie for coming and sharing her expertise with us today. So welcome, Carrie, and welcome to those who have joined us, and we'll get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Lydia. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate all of you spending some time focusing on this really important topic today, and really a huge thanks to IPSS for inviting me to participate in this webinar series. Lydia, would you be able to maybe just share what roles and backgrounds do we have? Who's with us today?
So far, it looks like we don't have lots of people that have been able to post where they're from in the chat. So if you guys could get on and do that, that would be great. What we do have, we have Sonia, who's an Argentinian pediatrician and neonatologist.
Okay.
And then I'm a pediatric intensive care nurse. I'm guessing we have lots of other pediatric professionals. So we have Sarah from Toronto, child life educator. And anybody else, come ahead and we will drop that in. Anyone
Great.
else?
Just helpful to have some context before we go forward. So, okay, we can go on to the next slide then. So Lydia shared a little bit about my professional background. This is me in a sunnier location and a warmer day down in Arizona. In Minnesota, where I am today, we're still wearing sweaters because it snowed yesterday. And as someone's on from Toronto, I'm sure they can lament with me over what it's like to experience spring in the Northern Hemisphere. Anyway, really, I come to you today as a peer. It's been my experience that as healthcare providers, that we are really well trained to care for our patients, but we are extremely underprepared to care for ourselves. It's not that we don't know what we should do to care for ourselves, but rather it's a struggle to put it all together. So that's really what we're going to spend some time talking about in this next hour. Next slide. Our session objectives are just two. There we go. We're going to spend some time exploring ideas related to a new acronym, one more acronym for all of us, called self-care. And then you're also going to have some time to identify purposeful practices that you can incorporate into your daily life. I would ask at this time if you have the ability to grab a piece of paper and a pen, that will be helpful for the reflective activities that are a part of this session. Next slide, please. I have no disclosures. Next slide. I probably don't have to spend as much time here knowing that most of you probably have a background in simulation. But as you know how important psychological safety is, I really like to spend a lot of time here making sure that people are ready for the content they're about to receive. So I really feel that people need to feel safe when they're working on themselves. With that in mind, I ask you to honor people's stories as their own, that you're very welcome to share your experience in this webinar with other people, but not other people's stories, as we all own our own stories. Depending on where you're at today, both physically, mentally, or emotionally, the activities that we're about to dive into today might not be the right day. So if that's the case, I invite you to sit back and listen, but commit to applying it another time. And lastly, just a reminder that triggering is normal, especially when you are rewinding time or trying to unpack past experiences. Please know that this is a safe place to not be okay. Next slide. So depending on what time zone you are dialing in from, you may have already been hard at work this morning. And I would guess that your attention was most likely focused on others. So now I'm going to invite you to shift gears to experience a guided meditation with me. The script that I'm going to use is going to take us down along a path into a forest. I invite you to close your eyes and let your imagination fill in the details. The path that you travel on may look familiar to you, but it might be somewhere you've never been before. Close your eyes, get comfortable in your chair. You could even lay on your floor for those of us working at home, whatever it takes to get comfortable. Imagine that you are standing at the edge of a field. You see a tree and a line of trees where a forest begins only a few yards away. Just on the other side of the tree line, you see a trail. So you walk out of the field towards the path, then enter into the woods. The light in the forest cascades down through the leaves in a soft spray of light. The layers of the forest have various textures. The lower undergrowth is soft and green. There are ferns, moss, and small growths reaching up towards the light. The upper canopy of the trees covers you like a stained glass roof overhead. The light green leaves against the light blue sky create a soft, glowing ambient light. This light is gentle and soothing. The path you are walking upon winds down a slight hill and curves. It is well trodden, and you continue to follow it. This path is a combination of soil, roots, and small plants, but it is easy to walk upon. Once you round the corner, you see a stream. You continue toward it, admiring the large trees and the different types of bark on each of the tree trunks. Some trees have rough bark and others smooth, some light, some dark. As you near the stream, you can hear the rippling water sounds get louder in a constant rhythm. You see the rocks just under the surface of the water. The water swirls around some and pours over others. You decide to sit upon a large tree that's fallen over, and you slip off your shoes and dip your bare feet into the stream. The water is cold, but it instantly soothes your feet. As you adjust to the cold, you notice that the water is swirling around and over your feet. And as this water massages your feet, you can hear the birds chirping, and a ray of light comes down gently on your shoulders. There are several different birds singing now. You can also hear the breeze that's fluttering through the leaves on the trees. You close your eyes and just enjoy these sounds. After you rest for a while, enjoying your surroundings, you decide that you are ready to leave. You grab your shoes, putting each one on, and step up the dry bank of the stream. You see the path that brought you here and start back up the hill, then around the bend. As you walk, many of the trees now seem familiar, like an old friend. You see the bright entrance of your path up ahead. And as you approach the entrance, you stop and linger. You turn around and look back down the path from which you've just come, taking note of what you are seeing and what you have heard. You can visit this special place anytime you'd like in your mind. Finally, you continue forward, exiting the forest and finding yourself in a very bright field. When you are ready, slowly roll your head from side to side, wiggle your fingers and toes, and when you're ready, open your eyes. For some of you, this might have been the first time you've experienced guided imagery. For others, maybe not. But I'd like you to reflect on this question. So take a moment to connect with how you're reacting to this experience. How did it feel? Did it feel good? Was it neutral? Did you hate it? With that in mind, if this was something you enjoyed, how could you create space for guided imagery or meditation in other forms throughout your day? Or better yet, how could you create this experience for the teams that you work on? Throughout the presentation, I'm going to ask lots of questions like this, and I really encourage you to use your piece of paper as a worksheet to collect some of these thoughts that come to mind so that you can bring them forward after our time together today. Next slide. Healthcare workers have always been in what I lovingly refer to as the impact zone. Really long before the days of COVID-19, healthcare workers experienced the positive and negative impacts of the work that they chose to pursue. I believe that really one of the silver linings of COVID is that the struggles that healthcare workers have endured for so long have been given a louder voice during this last 12 months. That the pandemic has perhaps eased the stigma and made it a little safer to say, I'm not okay, or this is too much. What I worry about a little bit is after the pandemic is over, will it still be okay for people to say these things? So I think that healthcare has a long way to go in caring for the people that work within their systems. But I think a good first place to start for all of us is with the idea of being proactive and being prepared for the hard days and the challenges that we know that we're going to face within our career. For a lot of us, our work is really unpredictable. We never know what our day is going to bring. But we can predict with some certainty that we will be faced with critical incidences, with stress and challenges that are hard. And as healthcare workers, it's really important for us to stop normalizing these things. That yes, these are normal things that happen within the walls of a hospital, but it's not normal for human beings to be exposed to these things over and over again. Um, and that we need to spend some time recognizing how these events impact us as a human being. The benefit of this recognition is that the sooner that we can identify that we're reacting to a stress or a stressor, we have a better ability to move towards caring for ourselves in a meaningful way. Next slide. Okay. Too many computers. Okay, so I mentioned in the beginning that I was going to introduce you to a new acronym, and I know we have lots of acronyms in healthcare, but perhaps this one will help you as it's helped me. So I really find the term self-care to be very broad, yet so vague at the same time. And when you go to look up the definition, I went to Webster and it states that self care is a noun. And the definition is that it is a practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. Okay, well, that's pretty broad, can fit lots of different things. So the question is to you to reflect on, how do you know what you need? Do you always know? And I should have said this in the beginning. Please, at any time, feel free to unmute if you'd like to share verbally, or you can really put your thoughts into the chat as well, or feel free to keep your reflections to yourself. All three are perfectly fine. The other question I have here too is it likely that we all need different things at different times? So while guided imagery is a great tool, there are times that I don't think guided imagery would help me. Like if I was just caring for a patient that had decompensated suddenly and someone wanted to pull me into a room and bring me through some guided imagery, I think I would really struggle with seeing that as a helpful intervention. Lydia, I think I see you've got something on the chat here.
Yeah, it's me. I was just saying, I really appreciated the question around how do you know what you need for self-care? And for me personally, I know that I often have to get into quite a tough spot before I take that time to think, what is it that I need in this context?
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't think you're the only person. I think it takes healthcare workers, especially, a lot because of what we've experienced within our careers, what we've normalized, that this is just part of the job. This is just what we do. And we minimize these moments that have great impact on us as individuals, as human beings. So I created this acronym to help me get started in figuring out what self-care could be for me, and perhaps this may help you as well. So this acronym represents intentionality and going forth with purpose. The acronym acknowledges the need to stop or pause while also accepting that you might not have the answer, giving grace and space to seek what you need. Really important to remember that self-care will be ever evolving because we are ever evolving as human beings. So thinking about what worked for us when we were in our 20s might not work for us as well in our 50s. An example I have of that is earlier in my PICU days, I have 3 daughters. They were quite small. And after my night shift, I needed to come home and read them a story before I went to bed because I needed to feel them, to love them, and be reminded that not every child is sick and trying to die. Now they're teenagers, so they're they're not as apt to cuddle up for a story on the couch. But that changed over time as they grew and I grew. But in my early 30s, that was a really important strategy for me at the time. Next slide, please. Okay. So it all starts with this idea of stopping or pausing. And what I mean by that is the pause needs to be physical and mental. And that can be a really hard thing to do depending on what is in front of you that day as you're at work. But it's a commitment to trying to create this space where you can, whether it's for just a moment or a few minutes or an hour, commit some time to yourself to pause for a moment. Next slide. Okay, so once you've paused, it's really time to assess the situation. And for most of us, assessment is the foundation of our practice as healthcare providers. So this is a really great opportunity for you to use your talents of assessment on yourself. So think about it as a mental full body scan that you're really thinking and considering yourself inside and out. From head to toe, and really diving in deeper, leaning into what are you noticing right now in this moment that might be a little bit different. Are you thirsty? Are you tired? Do you have muscle tension in your neck and shoulders? Are your feet and legs sore? Are you feeling overloaded? Does your nose feel like it's going to rip off from this N95 you've been wearing for 13 hours? Do you just want to run away? Are you angry? Next slide. So as you continue in this evaluative phase, the next thing that you want to think about is your reactions. So it's important to remember that stress looks different on every single one of us. And as human beings, we tend to have 4 different reactions or types of reactions to stressors. And that is physical reactions, cognitive reactions, emotional reactions, and behavioral reactions. And I'll apologize for this slide. Unfortunately, it's in a PDF right now. It should have been animated. But the blue line was just to show that it's not a linear practice or a linear experience rather. And the yellow line or yellow arrows really represent what really typically happens to us, that it's all over the place. Sometimes it might all be in one column, or it might be a little bit from every column. And so what do I mean by all of these reactions? I'll give you some examples. So some common physical reactions to stress may be nausea, clammy hands, a headache. Cognitive reactions come as distortion of time, confusion, people struggling to concentrate. Emotional reactions can be feeling guilty, increased anxiety, increased irritability. And behavioral reactions can be becoming hyper alert to your environment, withdrawing from the people around you, the people who care about you, and really finding an inability to rest. Really, like it or not, all of these reactions are normal. And note that there's really a full spectrum in how people experience these. What I find to be really helpful is that the power of identifying these reactions is when we do that, we have the ability to remind ourselves that we are having a normal reaction to a really challenging moment, that there's nothing wrong with us. We're not broken. This is just part of a normal experience. Next slide, please. So I was fortunate enough to present in May and similar content, and we spent a good amount of time on a worksheet that I love. And I don't want to spend too much time there today, but I would like to pause here for a minute or two and ask you to just read through these lists and consider what stress looks like on you. How do you wear stress? Do you know? If you've done this exercise before, I would encourage you to scan through the lists again and just see what's changed since May. What's new? What's popping up? I think we'll take a minute here to just look through this. Thank you, Anna, for sharing. And I'm going to get back to your question here at the end of this activity. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to read through all of these columns and perhaps you've identified, you've seen yourself in these lists. The first time I was exposed to a list like this, I was in a firehouse taking a class about stress management. And it was the first time in my entire career as a nurse that I felt normal. And that I realized that there was never anything wrong with me because I had begun to think that I wasn't cut out for this line of work because everybody else around me seemed fine and I wasn't fine. What I later learned is that everybody just had a better poker face than I did, but they were all just as impacted, just wearing their stress differently. So this was really pivotal to my own growth as a nurse and really as a human being, quite frankly. Um, Anna had a question in the chat about normalization. And what I mean by that is, and I think this happens within lots of different work environments, but specifically to hospitals, what happens within the four walls of a hospital um, is pretty crazy. So to people that don't work there, it would seem pretty chaotic. And I think that's why there's so many different television shows about ERs and ambulances, because the worlds are just so different than the rest of the community. But when we work within these environments for so long, it is normal to see a cardiac arrest. It's normal to see sickness and dying. And what I just want to caution people about is though it becomes a norm within your work, it doesn't mean that it stops impacting you as a human being. So just because you've been a nurse or a doctor or a child life specialist or a respiratory therapist for 15 years, it doesn't mean that you were issued a special suit of armor and this doesn't impact you as a human being anymore. And I hope that that answered your question. If it doesn't, feel free to type something back in the chat. I think we'll go on, Jennifer, to the next slide. Okay, this last part of the evaluation phase asks you to consider what your reactions are telling you. So this is part of the stress continuum model. And this was a model that was developed as a visual tool, actually for the United States Marine Corps, to help individuals assess their stress experiences, their zones of stress, and their stress responses. And I thought this was really fascinating. It was developed probably at least 10 years ago now, but its use has expanded now into healthcare, first responders, as well as still within the military as well. What they talk about with this model is that the stress responses lie along a spectrum of severity and different types. So you've got transient to mild reactions all the way to chronic and debilitating down in the red. And this continuum has 4 zones. So we've got green, which is the ready zone, yellow, which is the reacting, orange, injured, red, ill. And I think what I've noticed about this, as I've been thinking about this over the last few weeks, is while perhaps a year ago before COVID, one incident would usually be the source of pushing people into different zones. But I think with COVID especially, there's a cumulative impact that I think we need to be aware of, and the wear and tear. And we've fortunately been very lucky within pediatrics that this has not been terribly impactful to children, but it has been very impactful to the systems. And perhaps your work has changed throughout these last 12 months as healthcare systems have had to pivot to best support the populations that they serve. I like too that this model calls out that 100% of people will react when faced with a significantly stressful experience. But the caveat is the way in which they respond will really depend on lots of different factors. But some of these factors include how well prepared they were for the stressor and how they're able to interpret it in the moment. So the goal of purposeful self-care practices like what we're talking about today is really to stay out of that red zone. Next slide, please. Okay, we're moving along the acronym. We're on to L now for learn. So we've completed that evaluation phase of ourself, and we need to move on to the learning. Next slide, please. Okay. So I've got a list of things for people to consider. But this first bullet point, investing in yourself, I found that identifying and connecting stressors to reactions are 2 steps that are so often skipped for those people that are really feeling like they're falling down a rabbit hole. I've been doing some work in the last couple of months now with a large hospital system. We've been having these discussions, and they're called Unpacking COVID. And they're really focusing on kind of the scabs and scars that have been created by COVID-19. And there are many people that have not had the opportunity to really reflect on what their stress looks like and what actions help them come back down from a heightened space. So luckily for you, you've already done that activity today or taken the first step, but perhaps there's more to reflect on, more to learn, and more to unpack. So I would encourage you to go back to this again at some time. The next one on here is, what does your employer provide to support your wellness and well-being? What are you aware of? And this one, I would love for people to contribute in the chat the things that they're aware of within their hospital system. So larger organizations usually have an EAP or an employee assistance program. Are you aware of what that program provides to you for free as an employee? Are there things that your health insurance provides? Are there smaller initiatives that are hospital-based that are offered to clinical staff? So while you're thinking about that, if you have anything that comes to mind, I would love for you to share it in the chat. Okay, maybe while people are oh, here we go. Counseling is being offered. I don't know, Lydia, I might have to have you talk here. Hold on. Struggling to read. Let's see. Counseling is being offered to National Health Service staff in the UK. That's wonderful. And Lydia, do you think people are using it?
I understand that people are using it, but I think there needs to be more. And part of the issue is that some of the people who really need to access it are just still very busy in the middle of our sort of coming down from this last surge. And I think there's a lot of people that don't have the energy to even reach out for anything, any sort of help that's associated with work.
Mhm.
But I understand people are accessing it. I think getting the word out about it and how to access it is one of the bigger issues.
Okay. And hopefully over time, people will come back to it. I think it's really important when people recognize they're not like they know they need help, but they're too tired to do it. And
Right.
that's, I mean, it's a horrible feeling, but it's absolutely okay.
I
We've
think the
got,
biggest thing is that people are talking about it. And that's huge.
it is huge. You know, in healthcare literature, this has been pretty prominent now for the last 8 to 10 years, but it has been amplified more by COVID. See, Anna shares that insurance companies have online counseling that is more readily available. Anna, in your opinion, do you think people are using it? And Sonia shares that psychological assistance in the Turks and on the islands are provided by a company called Anova. Guess same question to you, Sonia. Do you think people are using it? Anna says yes, but it's kind of entry level. Okay. So there's lots of things out there, which is great. Apps or the use of apps has gone up. There's lots of forums that are available, which these are all good things, but it takes a little bit of time to figure out what works for you. And you need to be in the right space to mentally participate, which is important too. Next question, which again, I would really love for you to share in the chat or unmute your mic, is what is accessible in your environment that supports your wellness and well-being? So thinking about the units you work on, the office spaces or clinics that you work within, what has been put there, either purposefully or not purposely, that is supporting people's mental, physical, and emotional well-being at this point in time? This is where I think the AACN is, further ahead on this. They called out, the importance of healthy work environments a long time ago. And as I continue my conversations with unpacking COVID with different units, the units that are recovering faster seem to have more purposeful support in their environments, both physically and within leadership. Let's see, Anna's got a comment. Knowing we're in it together and being able to talk with the team, which is awesome. Having a team that you feel like you have a voice on is really important. If there are other things that that bubbles up into people's mind as we keep going, I would love for you to share them because this is a great way as an international community during this forum that we can pick each other's brains and try something new. Wobble rooms. Oh, I love that. Lydia, can you talk a little bit about that? What is a wobble room?
I don't know loads about it because I'm not working in a clinical area right now. But what I understand is that it's an area away from the clinical space, but that sometimes has psychology support, but not always. That people that just feel that they are not in a great place can just step away and just go and be and talk or not talk, depending on sort of what they feel they need at that moment. But a place where it's deemed okay not to be okay.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I've heard of resiliency rooms, break rooms, but I've never heard it termed a wobble room. I like that term a lot.
Seems to be a new COVID thing here.
Oh, awesome. Well, again, you have to find the silver lining in a pandemic. And I think there are, besides awareness, there's a lot of creativity that has been coming out. We still need a lot more, but it's a start. And then the other thing I'd invite you to consider is, and Anna already spoke to this, talking to your teammates, but talking about what has worked for your teammates as they have experienced these last 12 months. I know that when I was a new nurse, I was encouraged to talk to my peers about how do you sleep during the day when you're a straight night worker, and I learned from others. And we do that throughout our careers clinically. But what if we could learn and lean on each other to learn about coping strategies as well? Again, something more to consider. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, we're still within this learning phase, and we're focused on this commitment to our own personal well-being. But how do we model this when we're at work? If you don't model it at work, how could you model it at work? And my idea with this is that sometimes habits can be contagious in a good way. And when you feel supported by your peers, it's easier to continue forward on a path. Peer support, also well published in the literature. Lots of hospital systems have formal peer support programs. The downside is that they're expensive and they take time to develop, or they can be expensive. And it's been a hard year to start new programs. So if you don't have a peer support program, I bet you're already doing peer support in informal ways when you stop and have your mid-hallway chats with your peers. Part of the reason why we need this as healthcare workers is we have lots of people in our lives that love and care for us and about what we do. But our work family is really, those important people that understand our work firsthand because perhaps they've done the same work, and offer a different type of listening and empathy that's really important in our healing and recovery. If you're not familiar with the Pure RX program, that is a free program that's been created by a provider, and his name is escaping me right now, but you can sign up for that and you get email prompts for conversations to have with a peer. I think for patient-facing staff, this might be harder to implement, but something else to consider. Next step, please, or next slide. Okay, so we're finally to the last part of our acronym. And this is where you're going to find your path, but where you really need to remember that it's going to look different than other people's paths. And potentially, you might have to reroute along the way. It's okay to try things and then realize that it's not working for you for what you need at this moment, and then switch paths midway down. There's no judgment about that. Next slide, please. So we're going to go back to your piece of paper again. And as we talked about earlier, it's really difficult for us to care for ourselves in the moment or when we're in a heightened state. So today, hopefully, as you're in a relaxed state, this is a moment to mull things over, creating your own action plan or your own menu of options that could help you the next time you are in a heightened state. And how I came up with this idea was really a branch off of some teaching I was doing with some critical care nurses. So whenever we would onboard new nurses, I taught a section on hypotension, and we know that kids at some point, every clinician is going to have to treat hypotension. And depending on the size of your patient, there are different ways to give fluid fast. So in that moment, I don't want our staff dreaming up how they're going to do this. I want them to just select from their menu of ways in that moment. So I took that idea and applied it to us. When we are experiencing a critical incident or a very challenging moment or a very large stressor, our ability to know what to do for ourselves is really hard or limited. So the idea here is to dream or to spend some time thinking about what could be helpful in this moment. So then the next time you face challenges, you can go back to your menu and just pick one thing to try in that moment to help support you as you're reacting. Um, I think based on time, we'll just pause a moment here for you to consider us, but this is a little bit of false advertising because we don't have enough time to really complete the whole activity. So it's a seed planting with some homework, with the idea of perhaps coming back and making some time to create your menu. And I did give a few examples of things that can be important within your environment. And if people are willing, I would love for people to unmute or use the chat um, to share really what's been helpful for people in caring for themselves during their work shift, especially, and things that they've noticed are important to have within the environment or things you would like to see in your environment. Lydia has a comment in the chat about having enough space in the break room. It seems so basic, but sometimes these are the these are quite crowded, and time is of the essence. So where is that space? Unfortunately, it ends up being a stairwell for lots of healthcare workers to find a quiet space. Um, or perhaps you've come up with other creative areas. I know our hospital-based simulation space was actually a great quiet space to go off hours because the sim team wasn't working with teams. So if you had access to that space, that was a place that I would like to go sometimes. All right, we'll continue to the next slide just because of timing, not because you don't deserve more time to do this activity. I would be remiss if I did not call out that there are obstacles and barriers to this. And so it just requires us to be aware because there's no magic. This is a behavior change and it's hard. If it was easy, there wouldn't be so many articles about it and there wouldn't be so much struggle. But for your and your team to succeed, you really need to be honest with yourself while also being willing to discuss your ideas and your concerns with your leaders. Next slide, please. As we get better at pausing and creating space for ourselves, I hope that one day we can aspire to this. And I'll just read this in closing. I lied and said I was busy. I was busy, but not in the way most people understand. I was busy taking deeper breaths. I was busy silencing irrational thoughts. I was busy calming a racing heart. I was busy telling myself I am okay. Sometimes this is my busy, and I will not apologize for it. And this was written by Britton Oakman, an author that I enjoy. I would like to thank you all for spending time with me today. I hope that you gained at least one thing to bring forward for yourself, and one thing to bring forward for your team. And we do still have a few more minutes. So if you have some questions, I would invite you to unmute or hop them in the chat. And Lydia and I will do our best to make sure we see everything. See during work. So Sonia has a comment in here. During work, I try to focus on the problem, possible solutions, and try to be objective about the distribution of activity with the team based on recognition of their best skills. After work, nothing better than a walk, minimum 4 miles, with a visit to the beach. Oh, a woman after my own heart. That is wonderful. I like the focus that you have on one thing. So that idea of one thing at a time, really trying over, which is great.
And Sarah's noted that she really loves that quote. And that was exactly my thought too. I feel like I need to frame that, put it next to my mirror. I think that will resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, because, sometimes, I don't know, we've told ourselves that it's not okay to be busy doing these things when really this is what we need to be busy doing for ourselves and for the patients and families that we serve.
Well, thank you all so much for participating today. And thank you, Carrie, for sharing with us, sharing your expertise and your experience. I imagine that many people like me will go away and reflect quite a lot on how I can put some of those practices, actually plan for those practices. And that's what I want to do, is think about how I plan for myself, but also how I embed this into the team activities. Because I think there's an element of role modeling that all of us have to work on when it comes to practicing self-care, so that others feel able to do the same for themselves, and for the others that they take care of or are responsible for. So thank you so much. Just a reminder to everyone that the recording of today's webinar, along with the handouts, will be posted in the members only area of the IPSS website in the near future. I'm looking forward to the handouts in particular as well. I think that will really help facilitate some of these conversations moving forward. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Carrie, for your time and your expertise. And please do check on the IPSS website for the materials. They'll be there in the coming days.
Thank you.
Thank you all.